Patrol Squad 9 faces an unexplained event after their ship is struck by an ominous presence. As the crew attempts to investigate, their systems fail one by one, and strange noises echo from within the hull. The feeling of being hunted intensifies when their communications go dark, leaving them isolated and vulnerable. The tension reaches a breaking point, but the real horror begins when the feed cuts. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was the only sound in the cockpit, but it wasn't comforting. Lieutenant Collins leaned over the console, tapping through systems that should have been operational, only to be met with failure after failure. The flickering lights, the malfunctioning readouts, and the strange pulse of energy in their hull. It all added up to something they couldn't control. "Lieutenant, something's wrong," Parks said, his voice strained, eyes scanning the display. "We've got an irregular signal coming from inside the hull. It's not a standard." "Malfunction?" Collins looked up sharply. "What do you mean, not standard?" Parks hesitated, fingers still working furiously at the console. "I don't know. It's almost like something's moving within the ship. Something that shouldn't be there." The words hung in the air, like a cold whisper from the darkest part of the universe. Something was inside the ship. Collins shook off the initial surge of panic. They were on a patrol, deep in enemy territory. The thought of an intruder, whether alien or otherwise, was a chilling possibility. "Can you isolate the signal?" Collins asked, voice steady, though his pulse quickened. Parks nodded, but his face betrayed his own unease. He tapped the console, and for a moment there was only static. Then a sharp crackling noise came through the speakers, low at first, like something dragging across metal. The crew tensed, eyes darting to each other, then back to the sound that filled the cockpit. A scraping, slow, methodical, as if someone was trying to get through. "Shut the feed off," Collins barked. He had heard enough, but Parks, his hands frozen on the controls, shook his head. I can't. It's coming from inside the ship. It's like the sound's being funneled through the walls." "Are you telling me," Collins said slowly, "that something's inside the hull?" The question hung in the air, chilling the crew to their very core. Something was inside their ship. It couldn't be true. It was impossible. But the scraping continued, louder now, as if whatever was inside had started to move. The sound rattled the ship, sending vibrations through the hull. Private Taylor looked over at Collins, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is that?" she whispered, barely audible over the noise. Collins swallowed hard, forcing his voice to remain calm. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." He turned to Parks. "Isolate the section. Find out where it's coming from." Parks nodded and tapped rapidly at the controls. The ship groaned again, and for a brief moment the lights dimmed, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The whole vessel felt unstable, as if it was slowly giving way to the unknown. It's in the lower levels," Parks said, voice trembling. "The scraping's coming from aft, the storage bay." Collins' eyes narrowed. "Then let's go see what's down there." The crew moved swiftly, the tension palpable as they suited up, grabbing weapons and preparing for what might lie ahead. Collins, his mind spinning with possibilities, tried to focus. Was it a mechanical malfunction, some kind of animal or invasive life form? Or was it something more sinister, something that had followed them, waiting for the right moment to strike? They reached the hatch to the storage bay, Collins and Parks leading the way. The low hum of the ship seemed to die down as they moved deeper into the lower levels. It was quiet now, except for the ever-present scratching. Collins paused, his hand on the hatch. He could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that this wasn't just a routine check, that something much darker was unfolding. His breath caught in his throat as he pushed the hatch open. Inside, the dim emergency lights flickered as the crew scanned the dark room. The storage bay was empty, except for the crates and the thick silence that weighed down on them. No sign of the thing that had made the noise, The scraping began again, but now it was louder, closer. It was coming from the far end of the room, near a crate that had been knocked over. The crew moved forward cautiously, weapons raised, each step measured as the sound intensified. "What the hell?" Reynolds muttered, his voice shaking. "This is some kind of joke, right?" Collins raised a hand, silencing him. He took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The scraping stopped, and then there was nothing, a deadly, suffocating silence. They stood still, frozen, listening for any sign of movement. The seconds stretched out, becoming minutes, until finally the crew began to relax. "That's it," Parks said, voice tight. It stopped. But just as he spoke those words, the feed cut. The lights went out. The comms crackled, then died. The darkness swallowed them whole, and that was when they heard it, the unmistakable sound of something sliding across the floor. Slowly, deliberately, the scraping returned, louder than ever. They weren't alone anymore. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. The scraping was relentless. It clawed at the walls, deepening into the very framework of the ship, as if the hull itself was under assault. The crew stood frozen, weapons in hand, as the cold silence that followed the sudden loss of power felt suffocating. For a brief, terrifying moment, it felt like the ship had stopped breathing. Then came the sound again, slow, deliberate, agonizingly close. "Something's moving. Inside," Private Taylor whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempts to control it. Her hand gripped her rifle with white knuckles, the tension in her body so palpable that it almost radiated outwards. Lieutenant Collins swallowed, the taste of fear and uncertainty thick in his mouth. They had been prepared for danger, but nothing could have prepared them for this. The ship, which had once felt like their fortress, now seemed like a coffin, its walls closing in, the darkness too deep to escape. "Keep it together," Collins ordered, trying to steady his voice. He moved toward the storage bay door, each step measured, each breath controlled. "We need to find out what this is. Stay sharp." The crew followed him, inching forward like shadows. Every step was fraught with danger, every sound amplified by the oppressive stillness. The only light now came from the faint glow of emergency lights, flickering sporadically along the walls, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. The scraping had grown louder, sharper, like claws tearing through metal. It came from just beyond the storage bay, where the thick metal walls met the outer hull. Collins's mind raced as he tried to piece together what could possibly be inside. Could it be a malfunction? Something had to be wrong, but this felt wrong in a way he couldn't describe. "Ready yourself," Collins muttered, turning to Parks. "Check the integrity of the door. We may need to seal it." Parks nodded and moved forward, tapping the access panel on the wall beside the storage bay door. It hummed briefly before a sharp crackle sounded through the room. "Doors locked down. Nothing's getting through without power," Parks said, his voice betraying the nervous energy pulsing beneath the surface. "But we're running on emergency reserves. We don't have much time." Collins's mind raced. What had they gotten themselves into? Whatever it was, it had a plan. It knew exactly what it was doing. The realization struck him with a cold sense of dread. They were no longer in control. Whatever it was inside the ship had taken that from them. "We'll need to act quickly," he ordered, voice steely, though internally his fear had begun to blossom. There was no telling what kind of threat they were facing, and without communication, without power, they were sitting ducks in the middle of the most dangerous place they could be, inside their own ship, cut off from the outside world. The scraping sound continued to gnaw at their nerves, and it wasn't just the noise, it was the rhythm, methodical, intentional. It sounded almost like it was studying them, analyzing them. "Waiting for them to make a move, Lieutenant," Reynolds said, voice barely above a whisper. "If we don't act now, we won't have a chance. What do? We don't know what's in there." "I'm not sure yet," Collins replied. "But we'll find out." Let's see if we can make contact first. There's no point in wasting resources if... The scraping stopped. A breathless silence followed, and the crew stood stock still, each of them frozen in place. It was almost as though whatever was in the walls was holding its breath. And then, as if to confirm their fears, the lights flickered. Again, dying this time instead of returning. The entire ship was plunged into darkness, and the only sound was their own quickened breathing. "What the hell was that?" Taylor muttered, her voice laced with panic. "We move!" Collins snapped. "Now all of you follow my lead." He turned, his hands gripping his rifle tighter, trying to calm the storm inside him. Fear wasn't just an emotion, it was a strategy. And he wasn't about to let it dictate his actions. But with every passing second, the thought of what might be lurking in the ship's depths sent a chill that scraped against his resolve. Without light, they had no way of knowing where the threat might be or how close it was. The darkness had become a living thing, wrapping around them like a shroud, suffocating their senses, making each breath feel like it might be their last. The scraping started again, but now it was different. It was softer, more deliberate. So, crew froze, weapons raised as the sound seemed to move along the ship's walls, tracking them. It was as if the thing inside was following their every step. "Stay close," Collins whispered harshly. "Stick together." Parks moved to the side, trying to peer through the small viewports on the storage door, his hands trembling. "I can't see anything. Whatever it is, it's gone silent again." But Collins knew, whatever it wasn't gone. It was just waiting, watching. "Get ready," Collins ordered again as his eyes scanned the darkness around them. "When I give the word, open the door. We make entry fast." The group stood at the ready, poised to act. Every muscle in Collins' body was wound tight with tension. Time felt like it had stretched thin, a fragile thread holding them all together in the uncertain dark. The scraping resumed again, sharper now. It was almost as if the ship itself was being punctured. The noise vibrated through the walls like a tremor, sending shivers up their spines. Without warning, a metallic clang echoed through the room, followed by a hissing sound. Something had breached the ship's hull. "Collins!" Reynolds shouted, his voice full of panic now. "Something's getting through." Just as he spoke, the entire ship seemed to tremble. The floor beneath their feet shifting, the lights blinked out again, leaving them in the abyss. A soft, mechanical whirring noise filled the air, followed by the sound of something sliding into place. Then the sharp clank of metal against metal. In the pitch-black silence, a cold voice crackled through the comms. "We're inside." And then the feed cut. The blackness consumed them, leaving them stranded in the terrifying unknown. The only certainty left being the relentless sound of something moving inside the hull. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. The tension was unbearable, suffocating the crew inside the dark, silent ship. Collins stood motionless, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The feed had cut. The last message from whatever had breached the hull still echoed in his mind. "We're inside." He could feel the sweat on his brow, the quickened pace of his heartbeat, but his mind remained sharp. Panic would do nothing. They had to stay in control, no matter what was coming for them. "Lieutenant," Private Taylor's voice trembled from behind him. "What do we do now?" Collins swallowed, forcing himself to focus. He couldn't afford to hesitate. They had no communication, no power, and now no idea what they were facing. But there was one thing he knew for certain. They had to find a way to fight back. "Stay in formation," Collins said, his voice low and firm. "We don't know what's inside, but we won't be sitting ducks." The crew nodded, weapons raised as they moved cautiously through the darkened halls of the ship. Each step felt like it carried the weight of the universe, each creak of the floorboards amplified in the suffocating silence. They passed through the narrow, winding corridors, the soft hum of the emergency lights their only guide. But even that felt like a curse, a constant reminder of the eerie quiet that had overtaken the vessel. As they moved deeper, Collins could hear it, scraping once again, distant but unmistakable. It was coming from behind them now, moving through the walls, a sound that seemed to follow them, no matter how fast they walked. "Something's moving in the walls," Parks muttered, eyes scanning every shadow as if he expected it to lunge at them. "No," Collins replied, his voice tight with frustration. "Stay alert." They reached the central hub, where the main control room was located. Collins approached the door, his fingers brushing over the console, but it remained locked, the systems down. He cursed under his breath. "Anything?" he asked, turning back to Parks. Parks was hunched over the panel, tapping frantically. "The systems. Fried. We can't get in." "We're trapped in here, aren't we?" Taylor said, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes wide with growing terror. "We can't even open the damn doors." "Not yet," Collins said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We find another way." The scraping was growing louder, closer. It had stopped following them in the walls. It was now in the room with them. Collins could feel the cold sting of dread creeping up his spine. Whatever was inside, it was getting closer, and the darkness seemed to press in on them from every angle. "We need to move," Collins said, his tone sharp. "If we don't act now, we'll be sitting targets." They turned quickly, but just as they were about to head toward the next exit, the entire ship jolted violently. The lights flickered, and the sound of something scraping against the walls grew deafening, like nails on a chalkboard. The ship groaned, a deep guttural sound, as if it was struggling to stay intact. The crew stumbled, thrown off balance, and Collins's stomach dropped. What the hell was that? Before anyone could answer, a loud bang echoed from the hall behind them. It was followed by a hiss, a strange mechanical sound, as if the ship itself was breathing. The door to the storage room, which had been locked moments ago, suddenly slid open with a low, grinding noise. A shadow moved inside. "Get ready!" Collins shouted, his heart racing as he raised his weapon. His fingers were slick with sweat, but his grip was steady. This was it. The thing inside had made its move, a figure, dark, indistinct, moving with a fluidity that didn't belong to any human or known creature, emerged from the storage room. It was massive, towering over them. The form was vague at first, its outline barely visible in the dark, but as it came closer, the lights flickered again, briefly illuminating its twisted shape. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything they had seen before. The creature's form was jagged, its body covered in a dark, metallic sheen that seemed to absorb the dim light. Sharp, spindly limbs stretched from its body, ending in claws that clicked together with a terrifying rhythm. Its head was too large, its eyes glowing faintly as it surveyed the crew. It didn't make a sound. Instead, it stood there, watching them, waiting for something. Parks took a step back, his voice cracking. "What the hell is that thing?" Collins' breath caught in his throat, but his voice remained calm, though strained. "I don't know." Then, as if it had been waiting for them to make the first move, the creature lunged. "Fire!" Collins screamed. The crew opened fire, their shots ringing out in the confined space, but the creature moved with inhuman speed, dodging the blasts. Effortlessly. It was too fast, too unpredictable. They couldn't hit it. The creature's claws slashed through the air, narrowly missing Taylor, and she yelped, stumbling back. Reynolds fired another round, but the creature was already gone, disappearing into the shadows. "Keep moving!" Collins shouted, his mind racing. They couldn't stay in one place for long. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't going to give. Up! It was hunting them. They retreated down the hall, their footsteps hurried and frantic. The lights flickered again, casting their surroundings in a maddening rhythm of light and dark. Collins knew they couldn't outrun it. They were being hunted, trapped in a ship that was no longer theirs. They had to fight, but they had no way to fight back against an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't understand. "Stay close!" Collins barked. "Don't break formation!" But it was too late. From behind them, they heard it again, scraping against the walls, louder than ever. The creature was closing in, and they had no place left to run. With a deep breath, Collins turned to face the approaching darkness. "We'll fight to the end." And just as the creature stepped from the shadows, the lights went out entirely, leaving them in a darkness deeper than the void outside the ship. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. The darkness felt like it was closing in around them. The lights had gone out completely, plunging the crew of Patrol Squad 9 into a cold, suffocating blackness. The creature was somewhere in the room, its presence palpable, its breathing low and measured, like the silence before a storm. Collins's grip on his rifle tightened. He could hear the sounds of his crew's breathing, shallow and quick, as they waited for the inevitable. They were cornered, trapped in the heart of the ship with no way to escape and no way to see their enemy. "We need to get to the aft hatch," Collins whispered, though he didn't know if anyone could hear him. The darkness was all-encompassing. But they had no choice. The aft hatch was their only chance of survival. It would get them to the cargo bay, and from there they could, maybe, regain control. But first, they had to make it out of this room. "Follow me," he said again, though he wasn't sure if they were still together. He moved, careful but swift, his boots tapping softly against the cold metal of the floor. The scrape of metal against metal sounded from somewhere behind him, and a shiver ran down his spine. The creature was still there, following them, watching them. He could feel its eyes, even in the darkness. They weren't alone anymore. He turned to the others. "Stay together. Don't stray off." The hiss of a claw scraping against metal cut him off. He whirled, raising his weapon. A figure darted in and out of the shadows, too fast, too unpredictable. It was everywhere at once, and then a shrill screech pierced the air, louder than any of them had ever heard. It was the sound of something tearing into metal, as if the very walls of the ship were being ripped apart. "Move!" Collins shouted, voice raw. "Get to the hatch!" The crew reacted instinctively, sprinting toward the aft hatch. But before they could reach it, the scraping noise was joined by a deep, vibrating growl, a low, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate in their bones. The creature was closer now, much closer, its presence undeniable. It was hunting them, and it was closing in. Collins didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind screaming at him to move faster. He could hear the others behind him, but the growl of the creature was growing louder, more intense. It was moving toward them, not with the grace of a predator, but with a brutal, relentless force. "Lieutenant!" Private Taylor cried out, her voice full of panic. "It's coming!" He glanced over his shoulder just as a shadow lunged from the darkness, its claws slicing through the air with terrifying precision. It swiped at Reynolds, who barely managed to duck out of the way. The creature's claws grazed his arm, leaving a deep, bloody gash. He stumbled but kept running, ignoring the pain. The hatch was just ahead. They could almost reach it, but the creature was gaining on them. Collins could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as the creature's growl reverberated through the ship. They were running out of time. "Get to the hatch!" Collins shouted again. But just as they reached the door, the creature attacked. A blur of motion, a flash of steel, and the creature was upon them. It struck with inhuman speed, slamming into Parks and sending him crashing into the bulkhead. The force of the impact left the air thick with the sound of cracking metal and the sickening thud of flesh against steel. Parks grunted in pain as the creature's claws scraped against his armor, trying to tear through. "No!" Taylor screamed, rushing forward to help him, but Collins grabbed her by the arm. "Don't! Get to the hatch now!" he barked. But the creature wasn't done. It turned on Taylor, its massive form blocking the way, and with a low growl it lunged. Everything happened in an instant. Collins didn't think. He acted. He pushed Taylor out of the way, just as the creature's claws slashed toward her. The claws sank into his side, tearing through his armor with a sickening rip. Collins gasped, feeling the cold, sharp sting of pain as the creature's talons raked through his body. But he didn't fall. He fought, the adrenaline coursing through him, ignoring the blood that pooled beneath him. With a desperate final surge of strength, Collins pushed forward, using his rifle to slam into the creature's face. It staggered back, its glowing eyes narrowing as it hissed in fury. Collins, blood dripping from his side, barely managed to get to his feet. He grabbed Taylor's arm again, yanking her toward the hatch. "Go!" he shouted, his voice raw. Reynolds was already at the hatch, punching in the code to open it. But the creature was fast. Too fast. It lunged again, catching Collins by the arm just as he reached the door. It pulled him back with terrifying strength, and for a brief, horrible moment Collins thought it might end right there. But then something changed. A low, rumbling roar echoed through the ship, shaking the very walls. The creature froze, its claws still buried in Collins's arm, and for the first time it seemed to hesitate. Collins's heart raced as he tried to pull free, and then, with a final violent wrench, the creature released him, its glowing eyes. Locking on something behind him, it let out a sharp, ferocious growl before it turned and vanished into the darkness, moving faster than anything human eyes could track. The hatch opened with a loud hiss, and Collins stumbled forward, his body shaking with exhaustion and pain. He fell through the door, Taylor and Reynolds behind him, and the hatch slammed shut behind them with a final deafening thud. The crew was safe, for now. Collins collapsed to the floor, clutching his side where the creature had struck him. The pain was unbearable, but they were alive. They had survived. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, in the quiet, Collins heard it. Soft at first, then growing louder, like a distant hum. It was the sound of their ship that had once been their home, slowly falling apart. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't.